evening, this is Hound Dog Steve, and I hope this finds you well this evening. And Twitter. Oh my goodness, we have to talk a little bit about Twitter here. And the fact that broadcaster bias is destroying the mainstream media. And Twitter is something that I've never indulged in, and I've always felt that there is a big problem with Twitter because it gets you to respond and accept messages or statements in the worst of all possible conditions. And because you're limited to 140 characters, most of the tweets, responses and retweets are of an inflammatory nature, very, very provocative, and they invite a knee-jerk response because, of course, we now live in the cult of celebrity, and so everybody is looking for likes and retweets and how many people are following their Twitter comments and so on and so forth. And, of course, on top of that, everyone today has to have an opinion on everything. And you know, once you get started on this thing, you just can't keep up. I can imagine people who are on Twitter are basically looking at their phone all day long, looking at other people's comments and trying to upstage them or to rebut or just straight out insult the other person. And now, I mean, I guess you could say the upside of Twitter is that you can get the word about something out very, very, very quickly. And this, of course, is true. And when we look at things like Me Too, for example, boy, oh boy, I mean, this thing took off like wildfire. But the unfortunate thing that tends to happen with these kind of platforms is that there is this sudden blazing rush, you know, to its zenith. And the quick burnout as, you know, the hangers-on and, you know, the weak claims on Me Too and, you know, people saying, oh, he brushed against me, so on and so forth. You know, it took basically all of the real meaning out of some of the early Me Too situations that were put out on Twitter. So it's kind of self-defeating because all of a sudden, what seems like a good idea can get very, very muddy very, very quickly and go off on all kinds of tangents. And also because, as I say, you know, Twitter tends to encourage narcissistic behavior, so does Facebook, so does YouTube. You know, and I often question why I want to sit behind a camera and talk to people out there in the virtual world of Videoland and YouTube. You know, is this an ego thing going on? Is this, you know, I like the sound of my own voice? Or is it some sincere effort to try and communicate with my fellow human beings on this planet about issues which I think are important to all of us? And that it's important for all of us to either A, recognise that there are issues, and B, hopefully respond in some meaningful way to counteract some of the issues that I am talking about here. But what's really happening is because reporters and journalists who appear on, you know, mainstream media stations, outlets, newspaper journalists, this kind of stuff, also do tweets on Twitter, they are showing their bias quite clearly, in fact, and then they want to go back to their jobs as journalists and say, no, I'm unbiased. Well, it's pretty hard to play both roles, and this is destroying credibility in the media. And anyway, I found a letter here. It's in the online magazine Unheard, and it is exactly that. Broadcast bias is destroying media. So let's go over and take a look at that, and we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. From Unheard, and of course the picture here is Kate Burley come to the defence of her colleague on Twitter. Groupthink, broadcaster bias is destroying public trust, by Douglas Murray. Editorial impartiality is being sacrificed on Twitter for likes and RTs. Twitter is not always the best medium for exchanging ideas. I use it, but only as a notification platform, because I see on it people who I once admired behave in a way that erases nearly all respect. Intelligent individuals make comments they would regret if they had been texts to friends, let alone messages to the whole world. People who once seemed judicious in their judgments behave, at best, like scolds, desperately attempting to correct the world for not holding precisely the same views as themselves. Yet the social media platform does have an ability to highlight at fast speed some problems that are only noticeable at slower RPM in the real world. one of which is the uncomfortable, ever-vanishing line between comment and journalism. While this blurring is not a completely new phenomena, Twitter does have an ability to highlight as well as to speed along cultural shifts. Earlier this week there was a fine example of this trend. As news of Boris Johnson's successful Conservative Party election victory broke, Lewis Goodall, Sky's political correspondent, tweeted a photo of a television autocue with the caption, "So great to share a set with Black Mirror today." For those unfamiliar with it, Black Mirror is a Netflix series created by the former Guardian journalist Charlie Brooker, featuring various dystopian fantasy futures. There is not very much for Goodall or anyone else to gain from this observation. It is possible that some people saw it and gave a snort of appreciation. Perhaps somebody somewhere actually laughed, but it is unlikely that anybody is still roaring days later at the brilliance and perceptiveness of the observation. So like most things on social media, the short-term gain is not worth the cost. For a cost there is, paid in public trust, even if not by the individual tweeter. If broadcasters still cared about the editorial independence of their employees, then comments like this would not be made by their journalists. For they further reveal what most of the public have come to suspect, that broadcasters presenting themselves as non-partisan in fact hold very clear political views, and that these usually veer in a particular direction. Most, for instance, tend not to be enthusiastic Leave voters who secretly admire Prime Minister Boris Johnson and occasionally let this truth slip. Of course, people have always harboured their suspicions, but not until journalists began to freely give away their thoughts on social media was such a smorgasbord of evidence presented. For years, Gavin Esler was the apparently impartial presenter of many leading BBC political shows, including Newsnight, holding people to account whatever his own views. This was back when we viewers did not have access to a presenter's opinions. Instead, we would have to guess from throwaway remarks or the way they might interview one person compared with another. After the Brexit vote, however, it became clear that Esler had exceptionally strong views about British membership of the EU, and then in April of this year he announced his membership and candidacy for the pro-Remain Change UK party. In a speech at its launch and in subsequent media appearances, the man who had only recently been presented as impartial on our television screens turned out to be as partial as it was possible to be. Indeed, some of his political interventions could legitimately be described as foam-flecked. Are the public to pretend that Gavin Esler pre-2019 was a different beast from the Gavin Esler of this year? Or do we presume that he always held certain views and only really broke out when there was a chance to express them while standing, unsuccessfully as it turned out, as a candidate for the European Parliament? Esler may have broken cover, but by following a number of broadcasters on Twitter, particularly BBC and Sky broadcasters, it is now clear that the barrier is eroding for everyone. When Goodall sent his Black Mirror tweet, the journalist Tim Montgomery, formerly of this parish, tweeted, "Throughout Sky News we have pundits posing as reporters. Neither Sky execs or Ofcom seem to give a damn." In response, Goodall's Sky News colleague Kay Burley went for Montgomery herself. "You're an absolute disgrace to our profession," she tweeted. "Seriously." It was, as Montgomery went on to say, a pretty unprofessional response in itself, but he was right. There is something strange about this whole game. Partly it is so eroding to public trust because it all goes in one direction. On one single occasion in recent years, a television presenter let slip a view that did not fall into lockstep with the narrow orthodoxies of the broadcasting class. When Politics Live presenter Andrew Neil sent out one tweet last year mocking the increasingly conspiratorial Observer writer Carol Cadwalader, he not only deleted the tweet but himself immediately became a news story. There were swift calls for his sacking, and the BBC felt compelled to publicly chastise Neil. As it happens, despite being almost uncontested as the country's leading political interviewer, Neil no longer has a regular slot on the BBC. The incident stands out partly because it is so unusual for a broadcaster not to go in one predictable direction, but also because it was clear that a price must only be paid when the opinions are the wrong ones. And yet the breaking of the fourth wall, the one which meant impartial broadcasters once refrained from veering into personal political expression, has had a damaging effect on broadcast journalism. Just observing what a broadcaster like Emily Maitlis chooses to retweet tells me more than I want to know about her own political views. Of course, these retweets go in the usual direction, and of course, it bothers me not a jot where those views differ from my own. The trouble is that they begin to colour the rest of the work. So when Rod Little appeared on Newsnight last week and was roundly harangued, indeed rather basely insulted, by Mateless, I did not think, what a tough interview. I had seen the sort of things Mateless tweeted and retweeted in recent months, and then, in the Newsnight studio, simply saw the same set of views played out in another form. There was no mystery anymore, no separation between the impartial interviewer and the opinionated tweeter. Will this have an impact? My guess is that it already has, and when the media complain about disappearing levels of trust in our profession, it is worth remembering that we only have ourselves to blame. I think you can see that mainstream media platforms are going to continue failing and dying and losing the interest of regular folk, because at the end of the day, whether you have a university degree or you're a plumber or even a barber, what you want is good, honest, unbiased reporting. I just want to hear the story. I don't want to hear your opinion on the situation. I want to hear the facts about the situation written in a readable fashion. So this is really, you're undoing yourself, and you're turning more and more people into the kind of media platforms that we're now appearing on YouTube, BitChute, Patreon, Subscribestar, and so on and so forth. And I think that is going to continue to happen. So as the mainstream media continue to bleed viewers, they lose influence. And when they lose influence, they lose advertisers. When they lose advertisers, they lose revenue. And when they lose revenue, then those big salaried people have to go. The infrastructure starts to fall apart, and things aren't replaced when they get broken, and so on and so forth. So once you start this downward spiral, it's very hard to pull out of it. And of course, when people like myself, for example, can sit behind a camera and for about, I don't know what's my cost to produce this video, an hour, hour and a half of work. So let's say $40, let's say $100 to include everything. Yeah, that's the big advantage, that I can sit here in my office and do things on a very low budget and really do essentially the same job that they're doing, I hope, if you enjoy what I'm doing here. But there you go. So this form of media representation is going to grow, and of course President Trump has just been absolutely using Twitter to his advantage. And again, he understands that what he's doing on Twitter is doing two things, actually three things. It is basically bypassing the entire mainstream media, the press corps, everything like that. They can't keep up with him. He tweets directly to the public. The second thing he's doing is he's tweeting to his base. He's tweeting directly to the people who support him. And the third thing he's doing is absolutely outraging the left, the Democrats. And of course, when they tweet back and when they comment on his tweets in anger and outrage, they are really just showing themselves up, really from being childish. Much of the stuff I left behind in the schoolyard playground, and so should all of us. We should have learned these lessons, but that knee-jerk response, when I get an email or something that has upset me, yeah, sure, I will reply in the moment, but I save it in drafts and leave it overnight and reread it the next day. And when I'm posting on Facebook or on YouTube, I will sit and reread what I have written several times and imagine I'm somebody who doesn't know me, doesn't know what I'm thinking, is reading that comment. And because I want to be clear about what I'm saying when I'm commenting, and so I never put down emotional comments, I never comment out of anger, because as we all know, and we're seeing now, that spur of the moment response is very, very dangerous. Now, I'm not saying that we should abandon Twitter. What I'm saying is that we should learn the lessons of Twitter and platforms like Twitter, that you be thoughtful about your commenting, and if you don't like somebody, just ignore them. Because as we all know, if you can't ignore that comment and you do the fiery response, you are feeding the fire. And this really doesn't do anybody any good. So As I say, I'm not saying that we abolish Twitter. I'm just suggesting that you be cognizant of the psychological aspect of this, of the definite desire to respond immediately. Like I say, that knee-jerk response is incredibly tempting, and especially when you don't like somebody or they're irritating you anyways. And of course, there is a kind of safety on using platforms like Twitter to shout at people, because I think, not in all cases obviously, but in many, many cases, the things that are said on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube in comments, you would never ever ever dare say to that person's face, for fear of retribution. Okay, and I know this because I live in a small village, and some of the comments that happen on the Facebook page for the village, you're bumping into people in the local supermarket the next day. Hey Bert, what did you say that for? Now you have to face up to the responsibility. So be thoughtful, be careful, and tweet and comment wisely. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, comment and subscribe below, and please share this video if you've enjoyed it, because YouTube is no longer sharing my videos. I'm getting all kinds of email telling me that they can't find me in searches, that the subscriptions are not coming up when I make a new video, and so on and so forth. So please, if you could share this with your friends, I would really appreciate that. It really does help the channel. And in the meantime, you take care and you have a fantastic evening, and we will talk to you very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.